Why do we keep fighting each other? The question quietly echoes through shattered arenas in silent halls where faded peace treaties lie. And now, loudly, across heated arguments filling social media feeds. We proudly call ourselves modern, peaceful, and wise, yet the impulse to clash lives stubbornly beneath every breaking news headline, beneath every angry post. How is it possible for people who spend centuries carefully building grand cathedrals, majestic museums, and great universities to simultaneously pour vast resources into creating bombs, armies, and battlefields? Even stranger, why do we create private, everyday wars even in calm times, seeing rivals and enemies in co-workers, neighbors, strangers, and sometimes even in our own families? War isn't simply an occasional disaster caused by a handful of evil leaders. It's a deeply ingrained script etched into our minds, older than any national flag or patriotic anthem. Through the centuries, the stage for conflict has continually shifted from wide-open plains and forest clearings to crowded city streets, and now into digital spaces filled with aggressive online debates. Yet the underlying rhythm of conflict remains steady, always playing just below the surface. This video aims to show that war isn't a rare accident, but instead a reflection of hidden emotional forces, fears we deny, a strong desire for control, and our tendency to project our darkest impulses onto others. Great thinkers such as Carl Jung, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Michel Foucault have carefully explored these hidden forces. And understanding them helps us grasp not only large-scale wars, but also the small daily conflicts that play out in politics, beliefs, and personal relationships. To truly understand why this pattern repeats, we need to look deeper, far past modern headlines, beyond ancient empires and medieval kingdoms, and down into the earliest chapters of human existence. For generations, a story circulated widely, influenced by philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the story of the noble savage. This myth painted early humans as gentle, peaceful creatures who lived harmoniously until civilization corrupted them, creating greed, envy, and violence. However, modern archaeological findings have shattered this comforting tale. In his powerful work, War Before Civilization, archaeologist Lawrence Keeley documents a starkly different reality. Across prehistoric burial sites stretching from Europe and Asia to North and South America, Keeley found countless examples of brutal, violent skeletons pierced by flint-tipped arrow skulls fractured by heavy stone clubs, ancient settlements encircled by defensive ditches and sturdy wooden palisades. In these Stone Age graveyards, more than 1 in 5 of the skeletons clearly died through violent confrontations. These grim findings are not exceptions, they represent a consistent pattern, showing that war has always been deeply embedded in human life. Imagine the lives of Neolithic farmers in ancient Europe. During daylight hours, they carefully tended crops, planting and harvesting wheat from fertile ground. But at sunset, their peaceful lives shifted dramatically. They withdrew behind tall wooden fences and deep trenches, painstakingly built through collective effort. These fortifications were not symbolic, they were vital necessities. Danger, it seems, was always near. Keeley calculates that these early communities faced a level of violence higher even than the brutality witnessed in the industrialized warfare of the 20th century. Fighting, therefore, is as ancient as agriculture itself, deeply intertwined with human survival. Yet simple survival needs alone cannot fully explain our persistent willingness to fight. Anthropologist Pierre Clastres, in his influential book Society Against the State, observed something strikingly different among many indigenous tribes. He noted that some groups regularly engaged in conflict, not just to secure resources, but to actively resist internal oppression and hierarchy. Without central leaders or coercive systems, these societies deliberately used external battles as a way to maintain internal equality. War acted like a social safety valve, releasing tension outward, preventing any one individual from rising to dominance. Conflict, in these cases, served as a powerful means of preserving social balance and communal identity. This realization deeply challenges our comforting narratives about human progress. The impulse to create divisions, to separate us from them, is not a modern invention by complex societies or ruthless rulers. Instead, it arises from something more fundamental, a basic human need to define ourselves by clarifying who we are not. War, then, is not merely a tool for gaining land or wealth. It has shaped the way we see the world, influencing myths, legends, traditions, and our entire sense of identity. But understanding this deep human habit brings up an even darker question. Is conflict driven purely by external circumstances, resources, territory, or power, or does every human carry within themselves an instinctive spark, a hidden impulse that craves opposition and competition? Researchers in evolutionary psychology suggest our early ancestors survived precisely because they cooperated against threats from rival groups. Over countless generations, this need to protect and defend territory became deeply wired into our brains, making us sensitive to even minor provocations. Today, that same ancient impulse might ignite at angry tweets, political slogans, or perceived disrespect, triggering reactions similar to those experienced by our distant ancestors defending their homes. To fully explore these deeply embedded instincts, we must shift our gaze from archaeological evidence to philosophical and psychological insights. Long ago, philosopher Thomas Hobbes famously described human life without laws and social structures as a relentless war of all against all. Centuries later, psychologist Sigmund Freud introduced the unsettling idea of a death drive, a subconscious desire in humans toward aggression and destruction. Indeed, while war initially played out physically on open fields and muddy clearings, today its most fierce battles occur quietly within our minds, within fears, insecurities, hopes, and dreams. Our journey into understanding conflict begins here. We will move carefully through layers of human history, biology, psychology, and philosophy, attempting to uncover the ancient impulses hidden beneath modern armor and digital personas. By shining a clear light on these hidden forces, we begin to ask if conflict must forever remain our fate, or if perhaps, by understanding ourselves more deeply, we might finally write a different ending. If we truly want to understand why conflict runs so deeply within us, it isn't enough to just look at modern wars, current social tensions, or the debates dominating our news feeds. We must journey even deeper into history, into archaeology, to uncover the ancient roots of human violence. For centuries, we held on to a comforting belief, a gentle idea called the noble savage, popularized by the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. According to this story, early humans lived in peace, sharing resources fairly, treating each other kindly, and respecting the natural world around them. It claimed that civilization, with its laws, power structures, and greed, spoiled that original harmony, creating jealousy, competition, and war. But recent archaeological findings have shattered this hopeful picture completely, replacing it with a much darker and more violent image of our ancestors. Archaeologist Lawrence Keely's influential book, War Before Civilization, challenges this optimistic myth with a detailed, unsettling reality. Across archaeological sites in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, Keely presents undeniable evidence of brutality and violence. He documents skeletons pierced by arrows, bones scarred by weapons, skulls crushed by heavy stone clubs, and ancient settlements surrounded by defensive trenches and high walls, fortifications built not as symbols, but out of desperate necessity. These discoveries show violence wasn't occasional or exceptional. It was frequent and widespread. In some prehistoric burial grounds, more than 20% of skeletons clearly indicate violent deaths. Keely's evidence leaves no room for doubt. War and violence have always been deeply woven into the human story. Imagine life in a Neolithic farming community thousands of years ago. By day, villagers carefully tended their crops, patiently planting seeds, nurturing plants, and harvesting grain from fertile fields. It was peaceful, steady work, yet each evening that peace vanished. As darkness fell, villagers quickly retreated behind the safety of defensive walls and deep trenches that took enormous effort and coordination to build. These protective barriers weren't decorative, they were essential for survival. The threat of attack was constant, as rival communities regularly raided one another. Keely calculates that violence in these ancient farming societies was even more common than the brutal warfare of the 20th century, despite its devastating world wars. In these early settlements, conflict wasn't a rare crisis, it was part of everyday life, deeply tied to survival itself. Yet it wasn't just simple need or competition for resources that drove this persistent fighting. Anthropologist Pierre Clastres, in his groundbreaking book Society Against the State, uncovered another compelling reason many early tribes fought: to prevent internal oppression and hierarchy. Clastres observed something surprising. In many societies without formal leaders or governments, conflict was used strategically to keep power distributed evenly. External battles acted like a safety valve, releasing internal tensions outward so no single individual could dominate. Conflict, strangely enough, was a vital social tool used to maintain equality and communal identity. Fighting, in these societies, prevented the rise of tyranny by ensuring no one gained too much power. This realization deeply challenges our comfortable assumptions about human progress and civilization. The impulse to create divisions to clearly define whose versus them isn't something invented by later cultures or cunning rulers. Instead, it emerges from a deeper human need, a psychological instinct embedded within us. Humans have always defined themselves by marking clearly who they are not, who they oppose. War and conflict, therefore, have shaped not only physical borders and territories, but also stories, myths, identities, and traditions, our very sense of who we are. But this understanding leads us to an even darker question. Is conflict purely driven by external circumstances, such as the need for resources or territory, or does each human being carry within them an innate drive toward confrontation and aggression? Research from evolutionary psychology suggests our earliest ancestors survived better when they defended their territories against rival groups, cooperating to repel external threats. This ongoing survival pressure over thousands of generations hardwired human brains to quickly identify potential threats and respond aggressively when challenged. Today, this ancient reflex still remains inside us, ready to flare up at the slightest provocation, whether from political disagreements, angry social media posts, or perceived insults. To truly explore this deeper aspect of human conflict, we must move from archaeological discoveries to philosophical and psychological insights. Centuries ago, philosopher Thomas Hobbes described human existence in its natural state, without organized laws or social agreements, as a relentless war of all against all. Hobbes argued humans would naturally engage in endless fighting without strong authority to regulate them. Many years later, Sigmund Freud took this insight even further, introducing the unsettling concept of a death drive, a subconscious impulse toward aggression, destruction, and ultimately, self-sabotage. Freud believed this hidden drive lies within all of us, always waiting for a chance to emerge. Although war first played out physically on battlefields, plains, and forest clearings, today its fiercest confrontations rage quietly within our minds, within our deepest fears, insecurities, ambitions, and hidden desires. Conflict may now be less visible, but it remains powerfully present in everyday interactions, social tensions, and inner emotional struggles. The real front lines aren't just drawn between opposing armies. They exist within us, shaping our thoughts, emotions, and decisions. Our journey toward understanding why humans fight moves deeper into these psychological and philosophical territories. By exploring these hidden dimensions, we begin to shine a clearer light on the powerful, ancient impulses fueling human conflict. Only by openly confronting these darker parts of ourselves can we hope to move beyond the destructive patterns of hostility and violence. Only then can we begin to ask if conflict is inevitable, or if perhaps, by understanding our deeper nature, we can finally choose to break free and create a more peaceful, compassionate future. If conflict arises from deep instincts embedded in human nature, then we must go even deeper into philosophy and psychology to truly understand how these hidden impulses shape us today. The physical wars fought with arrows, swords, or bullets have moved inward, taking place now primarily within our minds and hearts. These psychological battles play out silently yet powerfully, guiding our behaviors, judgments, and relationships in ways we rarely realize. Long ago, philosopher Thomas Hobbes introduced a grim view of humanity in his famous work Leviathan. He argued that, left to themselves without laws or governments, people would naturally fall into endless conflict, living in constant fear of one another. He described this natural state of humanity as a war of all against all, where everyone was continuously driven by self-interest, mistrust, and the desire to dominate. For Hobbes, peace was never a natural state. Rather, it required strict control through strong rules and authority. Without this external control, he believed, humanity would always slide back into violence and chaos. In contrast, philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau offered a different perspective, yet he too acknowledged that something went deeply wrong within human societies. Rousseau believed that early humans did live peacefully, in relative harmony with nature. Conflict, he argued, emerged later, driven by the invention of private property, competition for wealth, and the formation of social classes. Rousseau saw civilization itself, not human nature, as the primary source of human suffering and violence. Yet even Rousseau recognized that once awakened, the human desire for domination and competition took deep root, permanently influencing how we live together. Moving further into psychology, Sigmund Freud explored these themes from an even darker perspective. Freud believed that human beings carried within them a hidden drive he called the death instinct, or thanatos, a subconscious impulse toward aggression, self-destruction, and violence. Freud thought this destructive drive was constantly held in check by society's rules, morals, and expectations. Yet this internal pressure never fully disappeared. Under the surface of every seemingly peaceful society, Freud argued, existed powerful, destructive emotions waiting to break free, often exploding in acts of aggression, prejudice, or outright violence when tensions became too high. Freud described civilization itself as a constant struggle between two opposing forces: eros, the instinct toward life, connection, and unity, and thanatos, the death instinct pulling toward destruction and division. Human societies, he believed, lived permanently balanced between these opposing drives. The peace we see on the surface often masks hidden internal tensions ready to erupt at any moment, triggered by stress, fear, or frustration. But Freud was not alone in exploring humanity's hidden impulses. Psychologist Carl Gustav Jung introduced an equally profound idea: the concept of the shadow. According to Jung, each person carries a hidden side filled with all the thoughts, impulses, and desires they refuse to accept or acknowledge. This shadow contains traits we often condemn in others: anger, jealousy, greed, arrogance, fear, and even hatred. Because these impulses are too painful or shameful to face directly, Jung argued, people unconsciously project them onto others. We see our darkest impulses reflected back at us, not within ourselves, but in the faces of those we label as enemies. This idea of the shadow offers profound insight into how conflict is perpetuated even in modern society. Jung believed the more a person denies their inner shadow, their darker impulses, the more powerfully those impulses manifest externally, fueling conflict and hostility. People begin to see their own hidden fears and desires embodied in external enemies, rival political groups, different cultures, opposing ideologies, or even family members. These imagined enemies become symbols of all the traits people refuse to recognize within themselves. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche further deepened our understanding by introducing the idea that much of human morality arises from hidden resentment and insecurity. Nietzsche believed that often people who feel weak, inferior, or powerless transform these feelings into moral superiority, demonizing others to feel better about themselves. He argued that hatred of enemies often stems from a deep internal resentment, a feeling of personal inadequacy projected outward onto others. The enemy, according to Nietzsche, is not simply someone we disagree with, but becomes a symbolic target for our own hidden frustrations and failures. Throughout history, we see clear evidence of this psychological pattern. Entire populations have projected their fears, anger, and insecurities onto imagined enemies, portraying other groups as evil, dangerous, or less than human. Propaganda campaigns have repeatedly exploited this dynamic, labeling certain ethnicities, religions, or nations as threats, parasites, or villains. Every major genocide, every ideological conflict, every political persecution has involved this psychological process, turning ordinary people into dangerous others, justifying violence and cruelty. Today, technology and social media amplify this age-old tendency in unprecedented ways. Online platforms quickly become arenas of conflict, polarization, and division. People no longer see those who disagree with them as fellow humans with complex ideas and emotions. Instead, rivals become simplified, caricatured enemies, strangers seen as morally corrupt, foolish, or dangerous. Algorithms reinforce this dynamic by promoting polarizing, emotionally charged content, ensuring that each conflict escalates rapidly, turning differences of opinion into bitter, emotional battles. This relentless psychological war creates a society permanently on edge, emotionally exhausted, suspicious, and hostile. We find ourselves caught in cycles of division, suspicion, and aggression, not just in politics or online debates, but even in our closest relationships. The battles we wage quietly within our families, workplaces, and friendships mirror the same psychological patterns behind major global conflicts. Recognizing these hidden psychological forces can profoundly shift our understanding of conflict. War isn't simply a political or social event. It is also deeply personal and psychological. Each conflict, no matter how large or small, is shaped by our hidden inner battles, our refusal to acknowledge the darker parts of our own minds. As long as we keep these darker impulses hidden from ourselves, we will keep projecting them outward, endlessly creating new enemies. But awareness can break this destructive cycle. By acknowledging the shadow, the darker side within ourselves, we take the first critical step toward breaking free. Only by openly confronting these buried impulses can we begin the difficult, courageous work of integration, reducing the unconscious drive to project hostility outward. Only by looking inward with honesty and courage can we hope to build a future less ruled by hidden fears, frustrations, and conflicts. This deeper understanding is essential not just intellectually, but practically. It can help transform our relationships, our communities, and perhaps even society itself. The journey inward, facing our shadows and recognizing our hidden impulses, is a challenging path, but it's also a hopeful one. It shows us that the deepest battlefield lies not outside, but within ourselves. If we can face our shadows with honesty, perhaps we can finally change the destructive script of human conflict, creating a more compassionate, peaceful future.